What you have done is not the way of a monk. It is not pure behavior, and it is something those who have left home should not do. We're going to start right out of the gate today with this dramatic, honestly pretty stinging rebuke from the Buddha himself. It's a quote that perfectly establishes the incredible tension we're exploring in this explainer. We're looking at the stark contrast between incredibly strict spiritual ideals and, well, messy, complicated, everyday human nature.
Okay, let's dive right in. Today we're looking at a text known as the 10 Recitations Vinaya. Now, often when we think about ancient religious texts, we kind of picture lofty philosophy or beautiful ethereal poetry, right? But what we're looking at today is completely different. We're examining this text not just as a religious document, but as a fascinating, highly detailed, and incredibly granular legal framework. And honestly, the wildest part? These laws weren't just created in a vacuum. They were born directly from real, ancient scandals that literally threatened to tear the early monastic community apart.
Here's our docket for today's ancient legal review. First, the beginning of Sangharadisesa. Second, Kaludayin's violations. Third, regulating gender and speech. Fourth, the strict ban on matchmaking. And fifth, strict limits on building huts.
So, Section 1, the beginning of Sangharadesa, which covers the core monastic offenses.
To understand the sheer weight of these laws, we really need to define exactly what kind of trouble these monks were getting into. The crucial point here is that a Sangharadisesa isn't just some minor slip-up. It's not like forgetting to sweep the courtyard or something. It is a severe, major violation. When a monk commits one of these, it triggers a formal gathering of the entire Sangha. It requires a full investigation, a very public addressing of the issue, and a formal period of repentance. For all intents and purposes, it's a major community trial.
You can actually see the formulaic evolution of case law playing out here. Literally every single rule we're going to look at follows this exact progression. First, you have an inciting incident. Some monk misbehaves. This causes a massive public outcry, either from the local townspeople or from the other monks. That outcry makes its way up to the Buddha, who investigates, confirms the facts, and issues that stinging rebuke we talked about earlier. And finally, that specific misbehavior directly bursts a strict new legal precedent to make absolutely sure it never happens again.
Moving into Section 2, Kaludayin's violations. These are the cases rooted in desire.
This brings us to a recurring troublemaker who is really going to test the absolute limits of the Buddha's patience, a monk named Kaludayin. Our first case brings us to Rule 1, Intentional Release. Kaludayin actually bragged to visiting monks about masturbating. According to the text, he had this super comfortable, well-swept room with nice bedding and a pitcher of cold water, and he happily boasted that this allowed him to live quite comfortably as a monk. His peers were completely horrified that he called this pure behavior and immediately reported him. This forced the Buddha to investigate, rebuke him, and set a firm, inescapable legal boundary regarding bodily purity.
Now, what's really fascinating here is the hyper-specificity of the resulting law. The Buddha didn't just issue some vague blanket ban. The ancient law actually accounted for involuntary biological realities. It explicitly listed exemptions. If it happened in a dream without conscious action, if it was for the medical purpose of curing a disease, or if it was simply caused by friction from walking or riding, say on an animal, it wasn't considered a violation. It shows an incredible level of pragmatic, almost medical understanding built right into the legal code.
But Kaludayin didn't stop there, did he? He escalated his behavior. He began hanging out at the gates of the monastery, actively luring visiting women inside under the totally innocent guise of giving them room tours. Once inside, he would intentionally touch them. This completely terrified the visitors, who rightly complained that a place of spiritual sanctuary had essentially become a place of fear. And as you can imagine, this sparked a massive public outcry.
To prevent any future legal loopholes, the Buddha's resulting rule was astonishingly thorough. The text exhaustively lists every conceivable definition of inappropriate physical contact to ensure no monk could ever say, well, technically, I didn't touch her. The law explicitly forbids rubbing up, rubbing down, embracing, grasping, pulling, pushing, lifting, lowering, and of course, touching private parts. The text even legislates the exact difference between touching someone with clothes on versus without clothes. It is an absolutely airtight legal net.
Section 3. Regulating gender and speech. We're moving on to verbal boundaries.
Because physical boundaries clearly weren't enough to contain the misconduct, the law had to expand. And once again, Kaludayin is our repeat offender. He escalated his behavior further by making intensely lewd comments about women's bodies while giving his notorious room tours. But Rule 4 takes it to an entirely new level of manipulation. Kaludayin actually deceitfully told these women that offering their bodies to a pure, rule-abiding monk like himself was the absolute highest form of spiritual offering they could possibly make. He was literally weaponizing spiritual language for sexual gain.
Just look at how the ancient text categorizes these speech offenses. It demonstrates an incredible thoroughness designed to completely shut down verbal harassment. You couldn't praise a woman's body, you couldn't criticize it, you couldn't beg for favors, wish for them out loud, ask about her private life, or even subtly teach her that being compliant would make her beloved. The law covered literally every single rhetorical tactic a manipulative person might try to use.
All right, Section 4, the strict ban on matchmaking, focusing on social boundaries.
Let's shift our focus away from Kaludayan to a new offender and look at the civic role of monks. This case centers on a monk named Kala. Before he was ordained, Kala was a highly respected, clever layman who was famous for giving great relationship advice. People really trusted him to arrange good marriages in town. The problem, he just kept doing it after he became a monk. He was constantly running back and forth between households, carrying messages for lovers and arranging marriages. This deeply angered his peers, who were trying to practice austere detachment. Kala was completely blurring the lines between a withdrawn monastic life and regular civic matchmaking.
As a fascinating byproduct of the resulting rule against matchmaking, the text gives us a list of the 7 types of recognized marriages at the time. This adds such a cool touch of sociological detail to our explainer, revealing exactly how ancient relationships were structured. It ranges from marriages arranged ceremonially by pouring water over hands, to unions made purely for financial survival, to completely temporary arrangements. A monk was strictly forbidden from facilitating a single one of these unions.
The lawmakers knew people would try to find workarounds and use middlemen. So the text maps out the dizzying permutations of exactly what happens if a monk gives a message to a messenger, who then gives it to another messenger, who finally gives it to the family. The law covered every possible communication pathway, whether by word of mouth, by letter, or even by vague physical gestures. It proves the legal framework was specifically engineered to ensure monks stayed entirely out of civic affairs, no matter how indirect their involvement was.
Finally, Section 5. Strict limits on building huts. Here, we're looking at material boundaries.
Let's focus on a group known as the Alavi monks and the intense regulation of material greed. The inciting incident here is a classic case of complete overreach. The Alavi monks decided they wanted grand, massive houses for themselves. To build them, they constantly harassed the local laypeople, endlessly begging them for bricks, timber, axes, chisels, you name it. It got so bad that the locals would literally run away and hide when they saw the monks coming down the street. The elder monk Maha Kassapa witnessed this absolute public relations disaster and immediately reported their greed to the Buddha.
The resulting laws didn't just limit how they build, but exactly where they could build. The legal requirements for a building site emphasized that the monks had to prioritize public harmony and safety over their own material desires. An acceptable site had to be completely free of danger, so no snake dens or toxic insects, and it absolutely couldn't be a public hindrance. A monk couldn't just claim public land, a farmer's property, or some ancient shrine just because he wanted a nice view. The community actually had to formally inspect and approve the land first.
To show you just how incredibly closely material possessions were monitored, the Buddha handed down these exact maximum dimensions for a personal hut. A monk was only allowed to build a dwelling that was 12 handspans long and 7 handspans wide. That is it. It was a microscopic, highly specific legal boundary designed to severely crush the monks' attachments to comfort and material wealth, basically forcing them to remember their original vow of simplicity.
As we wrap up this explainer, I really want you to consider the paradox we've uncovered today. Why did a spiritual path entirely dedicated to letting go of the world require a legal code that regulated absolutely everything, from wet dreams to the exact handspan of a tiny mud hut? Well, the answer we've seen is that these hyper-specific laws were essential, not just for keeping the individual pure, but to protect the public image, the safety, and the harmony of the entire community from the very messy realities of human nature. It really makes you wonder, can any idealistic community actually survive without writing a rule for every possible human flaw? It's a fascinating question and something to chew on until our next deep dive.